Hi, my name is Owen Husney, and we're sitting here in Marina del Rey at the edge of the ocean, the edge of the United States, and I'm here to talk about a few experiences that I've had along the way since 1902 in this business, and hopefully shed some light and be helpful as well. Yeah, I actually started when I was about 16. And I went to become a junior counselor at a summer camp in Minnesota. And I'm sitting there, and one of the nights some traveling guitar players came through, and I just said, this is what I want to do. This is going to be it. This is my life. And they showed me how to make a G chord or a D chord or something like that. And so I spent, the rest of the time at camp. Went home from camp and sold my clarinet, which I'd been playing for, 8 years, and bought a Sears Silvertone guitar. It was a very nice red. Of course, you could slice salami on the strings, but they were so far off. But I went home and bought that guitar and then traded in something else, much to my parents' chagrin. I can't remember what it was. It was something else for a reverb unit, so I could emulate the surf sound at that time and be just like the Beach Boys. I grew up being a little thinking left of center, right of center, whatever the crazy creative part of you is. And I was constantly chided and beat up in junior high and high school, and I was the kid that you loved to lock in the lockers and do all that because I was this creative kid who didn't play sports. I didn't go for football, and I wasn't doing this kind of stuff, so let's beat this little Owen kid up and let's lock him in his locker and do all of that. So the story is actually one of those great, stories. I started a band shortly after I really went down to my parents' basement and just learned how to play that guitar like crazy. And maybe about 6-7 months later, came upstairs and said, I'm starting a rock and roll band. And I went to the school principal and asked the school principal if my band could play the homecoming party. And he said, well, we've never had young kids play live here before. Maybe you youngsters could come in and play. Well, we came in, and for whatever reason, we were good. The pieces, we weren't unbelievably proficient musicians, but we had great attitude and style and on stage and everything, and somehow we had that passion. And we came in, and everyone showed up at the homecoming dance to watch the school nerd make a fool out of himself. So the reason that it was packed at the homecoming dance was, God, the nerd is in a band. We got to see this guy. And I'm telling you that for whatever reason, we were great. And what came out of that was we played every dance after that, and I went immediately to the number one guy in school, much to the chagrin of the football players. And the career was launched that summer. After graduating high school, we cut a little record. My uncle owned a little recording studio, and he was actually a big distributor in the business for a long time. And he had a little studio, and we went and cut the record in the studio, and we pressed it up and brought it out. I brought it out to the station. Back in the days when you could physically take your product out to the station and the DJ actually said, hey, I'll listen to it, and if it's any good, I'll play it. I had already had girls sitting by their phones and said, and this was WDGY in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the big AM, rock and roll station, summer of '65. And I already had girls lined up to call. And he did spin the record, and all of a sudden his phone lines lit up. It was like right out of one of those movies. And they said, we got something here. So the record went number one in Minneapolis, then number one in Milwaukee, then number one in Chicago, then number one in North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa, Kansas City, and it just spread to about 19 cities. So suddenly I was, went from being beat up and shoved in my locker to on tour. It was a lot of fun. I made a whole lot of money and spent all of it. So at the end we toured for about 5 years. And at the end of that tour, my agent called up and said, well, I don't have that big, 3,000-seater in Kansas City for you to play anymore, but I'll tell you what, I got a week at the Holiday Inn in Duluth. And I said, I'm out of here. We were really good at what we did, but I knew there were a lot better musicians out there. So I was a miniature one-hit wonder. I was happy to do that. And then I figured my life is going to be helping musicians to get where they go now, because in the middle of all that, I found that my manager was ripping us off. So I fired him and I became the manager of the band, got in control of the money and everything that was going on. Well, we discovered we were broke. So I had to sell my Jaguar XKE. The lead singer had to sell his Thunderbird, and we had enough money to get an apartment and go to work selling aluminum siding for about 4 months. And then there was a local booking agency, and we actually sold so much aluminum siding that they gave us nicknames, which I'm not going to tell you. But we were able to sell a lot of aluminum siding in that 4-month period, the lead singer and myself. And it was great because we were in a phone room and nobody could see, and we were very well known in our city at that time, you know. And so what happened was someone that I knew in town was a booking agent, and I went to work for him. We eventually became partners. But one of the interesting things that happened was when the national promoters came in town, they called our agency and said, "Can you put one of your local bands on as an opening act?" So I just said to them, "Okay, I'll give you the opening act, and how about if we handle any arrangements, backstage food for you? By the way, we do that." And which I'd never done in my life, you know, but we do that. We have a whole full service, you know, company here. We'll provide the food backstage. We'll make your arrangements. We'll line up the hall for you. And the guy said, "Okay, why don't you do that?" Well, so what happened was I started out being the guy. I would supply the local band to go on for the major artists, like when Steppenwolf and Janis Joplin and all this came through. I was the guy that folded the bologna in the back, you know, in the dressing room, and made the arrangements. But the great thing about it was, while I was folding the bologna and making sandwiches out of it for the backstage food for these major artists that were coming into town, I got to hear a lot of the discussions between the artists and the managers and the rest of the band members. Well, still, you know, Steppenwolf would come in and I was just silent in the back room making potato salad or whatever and getting ready for them to eat. But I was privy to all of their discussions between the managers, between the artists, you know, and it was very similar to the discussions that went on in my band in the mid-'60s. But I began to understand how it worked and what the problems of the business were, and the melees and the egos and, you know, all of that stuff that went on. Then one day I went to see an act. It was Richard Harris. And Richard Harris had won an Academy Award for A Man Called Horace, and then he had a song written by, I think, Jimmy Webb, which was MacArthur Park. Someone left a cake out in the rain. And so I went to see him. He had a full orchestra. I liked the song, MacArthur Park. It was huge. It was #1. And I walked in with my date and doubled the audience. And I thought, well, this is a travesty. This guy's got a #1 record. He's a star. He's won an Academy Award. He's got a hit record. No one's here. And I was looking around, I thought, you know, there's some college kids here. This isn't the right audience. His demographic, his main target profile is a 35-year-old woman. That's who he appealed to. So I wrote him a letter and dropped it at the hotel, and I said, I am able to go out on tour with you and build your audiences. It's terrible, Mr. Harris, that you're not selling out. You should be sold out, packed. And I have experience, and I've been doing this for a minute, which I'd never done in my life. I can go out and build your audiences on the road for you. Now, this is in Minneapolis. And I dropped it off at some big letter, and I dropped it off at the hotel. Well, 2 days later, I get a call from his manager. And he says, "Boy, you're pretty good at what you do." I said, "Oh, yeah, I've been doing it for years," and blah, 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 blah. He says, "Well, we're going to fly you down to Miami Beach tomorrow. Can you be on a plane? I want you to meet with Richard Harris and myself and tell us your plan." And so I hung up the phone. I was like, oh, God, what am I going to do? I've never done this before. What am I going to do now? So next day I'm sitting in there with Richard Harris and his manager. It was the next date on the tour, and I had presented a plan for me to go in a week ahead of Richard Harris into all the markets and get all the midday shows, which were all these 35-year-old women. That was his target demo. And get all these shows. Well, they all wanted to see Richard Harris. So I went in a week before, ahead of him. He was with his road manager. And then I would line up all these daytime shows, go into the market and talk to the radio guys and the afternoon guys and the midday shows, all that stuff. And long story short was, and he would come in, and he would do all these shows for like a couple of days. And after about 3 weeks of doing this, nothing more than 3 weeks, we started to get to half audiences and three-quarter audiences, and I had never really been out on tour with anybody like that, and it started to work, actually, and to the point where we got sold-out shows, and then he asked me to do the Tonight Show with him and be there with him and do all that kind of stuff. I can't remember the whole thing about this, and I'm going back to ancient history, but I think his wife was leaving him at the time for George Harrison or something. And he was just despondent. He was, may he rest in peace. He's a great and gifted human being, and he wised up a lot later. But, I mean, this is a man that could sit down and do 20 drinks at once. And so I found myself carrying him out of more places and breaking up fights, and so I learned that part of it. And then after that, I went out on the road with other artists. I went out with Sonny and Cher. I went out with the Stones. I went out with Alice Cooper, and doing their publicity out there. Everything was leading up to me being a manager, which I did not want to be, because I felt it was a really stupid, thankless job, which it is, by the way. Yeah. What happened was I came back to Minneapolis and got off all those tours, and then I started partnering with the concert promoter. So then I became the promoter. Over there on my wall is my first show. I did the Doobie Brothers with Argent and the Bob Seger group. And then from there, I did tons of shows. I did the Rolling Stones, and I was the guy that, was the promoter and partnered in a lot of different cities in the Midwest. I was the concert promoter, and I had a little recording studio, and I was kind of the guy about town. There was one band that I saw, and I never wanted to be a manager, but I thought I could really make them happen. I can't remember. Remember their record, their single or their demo that they gave me was called Long Arm of the Law. And so I started trying to say, well, maybe I should manage these guys. Maybe I can put them on some of the shows that I'm, promoting. And I got into a big battle with them because I think it was Black Sabbath's manager at the time was also onto the group, and he wanted him. So I got into this big battle going on. In the midst of that battle, this kid calls me up and he says, I've got the next greatest thing on the face of the earth. And I said, I've heard that a million times. And he said, I've got the next greatest thing on the face of the earth. You're not going to believe this. So I said, yeah, I'll see you later. Meanwhile, he comes and he's sitting on my couch in my office, and I won't answer the phone, and I won't let him see me. And at the end of the week, I finally felt sorry for him, and I said, all right, come on into my office, play me this demo of this next greatest thing. So he puts it on, and I listened to the first song on there, and I said, you know what, this is real. This is the real thing. I mean, who's the group? He says, sit down. I said, come on, I don't sit down. He says, I'm telling you, sit down. And I said, no, just tell me who the group is. He said, well, it's one kid. He's 16. He's playing all the instruments, writing everything, and singing all the voices, and it's all him. So I sat down and I said, well, does he live here? and he said, no, he's in New York visiting his sister. So I got on the phone and I called him, and he came back, and it turned out that was Prince. So at that point, I decided that I would probably try to manage him and get into the management business, and and be a part of all that. And I called him. I came back and I met him when I saw the fire in his eyes and the attitude and the direction and the focus and the passion that this kid had. When I saw all of that, I thought, okay, I've got to devote my life to this, because this is the real thing. I knew I needed to raise money for it all. So I got a doctor and a lawyer to put up $50,000 each. And we got him in the studio. My studio was just a demo studio. I went to a bigger studio, and we did the demo. There's a lot of other stories, reasons that, how he got signed and why he got signed and all that. But I did a pretty famous trick. We had the demo done, and I knew that who knew me? I'm just a schmo from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Who cares about me in the big business out there in Los Angeles, California? So I got on the phone and I called Warner Brothers and I said, Columbia Records is flying us out, and they're paying for everything for this child genius. And, while we're out there, would you want to hear it too? And the guy was like, yeah, sure, no problem. And I got off the phone with him and I called Columbia and I said, listen, Warner Brothers is flying out to hear this child genius, And it's like, yeah, no problem. Please see us, when you're out here. We'd love to see you. They're figuring out it's on Warner Brothers' nickel. Warner Brothers thinks it's on Columbia. Then I called A&M Records, and I said, listen, we're being flown out by Columbia Records. Do you want to hear? And yeah. So I got into all those, and we put together the demo. I called in a friend of mine who actually was in my band with me to produce the demos. He actually has now become a pretty famous producer. Produced a lot of major hit records, and I called him in to do the demo. And the whole point of the story and everything that I've done is to be really stupid, because if anyone would have ever told me what I would have had to go through, if they would have said, okay, you're going to have to do this, and you're going to have to do this, and you're going to have to be in a band, then you're going to have to think about doing this, and you're going to have to manage it, I never would have done it. It would have been way too much work. I would have been free. So the whole secret to this business is A, never give up, and B, just be stupid. Just, when they tell you should get out and don't do it, just do it. That's the whole, and that's what I kept doing, is I just kept moving forward with it. And then finally to the point where we had the biggest artist signing of 1977. I stayed for a while. We did a few albums there, and Prince actually lived with me. So my then wife and myself, we brought him into the house, and he lived with us, and we put everything together and did all that, and we became surrogate parents for probably 3 or 4 years. And there came to be a time where it just got to be so much work for me, and it was getting crazy, and there was a lot of other things that I wanted to do, and there was other acts that I wanted to manage, and I knew that it was my first time. I just decided, I was lucky. I wanted to be in a band in my life, and all of a sudden we had a little miniature hit record. I wanted to be, a concert promoter, and I'm bringing in all the major acts. I wanted to go out on the road. I'm on the road. I was very, very lucky. I wanted to be a manager. Okay, now we found a superstar. But at that time, I really didn't, I'd never managed anyone before. And there were a lot of people who were much better at it than I was. Subsequently, I managed for many, many years after that. So I had to make a decision. I didn't want to hold him back because, and that's a very good thing for aspiring artists, is, the first time that you become an art, you decide you're going to become an artist, obviously you can't get a manager, so who do you get as your manager? Oh, my friend's cousin was in a band, he knows us, he can manage you. Or you remember Uncle Ed? He was in a band in 1952, he knows the business, he can. So you get with these people that aren't, and what happens is the band is learning at the same time that the manager's learning. That's not good. Your manager needs to be ahead of you and have the contacts. And so I knew that at that time. It was okay when it was smaller, but as we started to get bigger and bigger and bigger, I came to the realization that I could go on. So I sold my contract to other managers, and I held on to a lot of rights, which I settled later on. So everything turned out very nicely. No complaints here. But, there was a time that I knew that either I was going to look like a fool or I was going to damage the artist, and I didn't want to sue him or have him sue me. So I just did the most prudent thing, which is to sell the contract, make it all clean, and let him go on. I think he's one of the most gifted artists that will ever pass through our gates here on this earth. He is. Prince is talented beyond anybody's understanding of what he, of what he is, and he records all the time. There's stuff in his vaults that when it comes, and maybe even posthumously, we're going to look back and he might be one of those Beethoven, Mozart guys. He is of that ilk. He may have painted himself in a corner, by doing some of the antics that he did, but. You never discount the talent of that individual from one of the greatest jazz players I've ever heard. I mean, just a total natural, pure gift. And I'll tell you something, the true gift of a manager is to understand who that artist is and make that artist happen. By not exploiting that artist or turning that artist into something else. I mean, case in point, Prince was a very, very shy person. He's always been shy. He's been that way since the day that I met him. So I wasn't going to put him in a three-piece suit or turn him into a James Brown or somebody that's going to walk and talk and do all that. What I did, and I developed this press kit, which is on the wall here, is I left his mystery in place. So I took what was that artist and made that bigger than life. The best thing that a manager can do is look out for the needs and wants of their artist and be able to communicate the reality blows of the business to that artist and to be totally honest with their artist and know when not to bring certain pieces of information to the artist. You may not want your artist to read certain reviews. You might advise them, just don't read reviews anymore, because they're all going to come at you. You're putting yourself out there. Another thing that a manager has to understand is that an artist, especially, I only work with people who write their own material. I've never worked with anyone who hasn't written their own material. I don't go that route. I enjoy the true talent. Is to understand that artist who's being creative is putting their mind out for others to accept or reject. Is they are putting themselves on the line. So when we do a showcase and there's a writer and there's a band and that writer has, here's my song, and then somebody flat out rejects it, it's not like we're here and we're stocking salesmen, and we go to a store and somebody doesn't want to buy your stockings and you can go, well, all right, maybe the design wasn't that great. Whoever designed it, okay, I'll go home. It was a bad day. They are rejecting your mind. They're rejecting your soul. They're rejecting the vulnerability that you've made. You've made yourself completely vulnerable for someone to accept or reject. So a true manager, while they're making sure that the food is in the dressing room and making sure that you're out there and making sure that you're getting the dates and the bookings and getting trying to get you a record deal, also has to understand what that artist is putting out there. And when they get rejected, it's deep. It's 1,000 million times deeper for that. And it's to be able to understand and work within that. And even work within that in the studio. And to communicate the reality blows. Most artists who have been tremendously successful had very poor first albums. And to be with that artist and get them to get to that next album and convince the record label that they've got to be, and fight for your artist. You've got to be as passionate about what you do as what your artist does. So what is a good manager able to do? A good manager is able to surround himself with the right people. Over the years, I've learned a lot about entertainment law, so I can look at contracts and know what's good, bad, and ugly about them. But I'm not a lawyer, so the first thing I do is I go out and try to find the best available entertainment lawyer. Now, because that can only make you look good. There's a lot, and if you can't find the top and go out and get the number one in New York or Los Angeles or Nashville or Chicago or wherever it's going to be, there's a lot of good mid-level lawyers around. But there's a lot of questions that you have to take care of. There's a lot of things that have to be taken care of for your artist. The publishing, the right contracts, agent contracts, all of this kind of stuff. So you have to look out for your artist. You can't be any guessing. You can't have Uncle Ed from down the road do it. Uncle Ed can do it to help you get to that next stage, but Uncle Ed's got to know that he's out the minute a professional comes in. It's difficult to explain because I've only done it by second. It's just kind of second nature. Oh, I need to have a really great attorney behind this. But I think that most managers are just out there fighting the fight for their artists, communicating the reality blows for their artist, the reality blows that happen in the business to their artists, taking care of them, understanding who they are, not trying to turn them into something else or change them. And that goes the same for a lot of producers in the studio. You don't want to take an artist that comes in and say, okay, listen, let's add, cowbells and let's have you sound like, the Captain and Tennille. You have to take what is central to that artist and make it bigger than life. Not try to change them or imprint your sound or do anything like that on there. The relationship between a manager and artist is you've got to be not only their father and their mother, but you've got to be their best friend, and you have to be their business manager. It's a very tough role to be in. You get a percentage of their career, and you get a percentage of, you get a percentage of their recording career, their royalties, their publishing if they're a writer, their touring, their merchandising, their placements of their songs into film, television, and commercials, which is called licensing. I'm managing a group right now who's being romanced by every major label out there. And the first thing that the writer said to me is, I don't want my songs used in commercials. I don't ever want to look up and see my song that I've written used in a hemorrhoid commercial or a car commercial or a cigarette commercial. And that's, I've got to fight for that if I believe in that artist, even though it's very lucrative, I couldn't believe it because he's from my hometown, but Bob Dylan in a financial planning commercial, that's beyond. But I bet people are doing it. Led Zeppelin in a Cadillac commercial. I guess all the hippies grew up and are now, upper middle class, and they're looking at Cadillacs, and they're all my age, huh? And so they all want Cadillacs. So, wow, here's Robert Plant. So you have to fight for the rights of your artists. You have to have enough of an understanding. You have to be their best friend. You have to really know the business. I've heard more people tell me these days, get everything you can out of a record label because you're never going to see anything again. And, in a way it's true, in a way it's not. I mean, if you become, go out and sell 5 million units, you're going to make a lot of money off your deal. But it is true that you can make a ton of money on tour. And your merchandising, and a lot of acts, and everyone, they're making a lot of money. If you're not a writer, if you're a writer, there's two forms to making a CD or a record. There's two forms to it. The person that performs it and the person that writes it. So like in the case of the Beatles, for the most part, they wrote and performed their own stuff. So your publishing deal is for those who wrote it. And your record royalties are for those who performed it on the record. So maybe you and I could have written, you and I could go out and form our band right now, and we could form a band and we could do Let It Be by the Beatles. We'll get the money for the record sales, but Paul McCartney will get the money for writing it. So there's two forms to that, and how those do. I forgot I got off on a tangent on that, but I wanted to explain the two parts to it. So a lot of times you can make money on your publishing as well. You might write a hit record that is a flop for your own group, but it goes on to become a #1 record for someone else. So you're still going to get a lot of money doing that. There's so many income streams involved in being a music artist. You have your performance for your record royalties. You have your publishing for if you wrote the song. You have your merchandising. You have your touring. And you have the licensing of those songs into film, television, and commercials. It can be very lucrative. Most artists these days get caught in that big trap. And that trap is, okay, we think you're great. Your band, the Four Chairs. We think they're the greatest thing we've seen. We will give you $500,000 to sign your band. All right? We're then going to we're going to give you another $150,000 in tour support. Then we're going to give you this advance. Then we're going to give you that advance. Then we're going to put money into here. Well, you have to pay the record label back. They just don't give you that money and you've won the lottery. Out of that $500,000, you're going to probably make your record for $150,000. Then you're going to go out on the road, so you're going to take another $150,000 in tour support. Then you have living expenses out of that. Gee, pretty soon, you're what we call unrecouped. That's when you have to pay what they gave you back. Comes time to pay the piper. So you go out and have a big fat gold record. Wow, we're hot. We've got a gold record. Gee, that gold record, you're still owe the record company money after that record. Because let's say, I'm just using some round terms here, let's just say you're only getting $1.50 an album back and you sold 500,000 records, you could still be unrecouped. Now the label says, well, we think either they're going to drop you and say, get out of here, or they're going to say, gee, we think you're great, let's do another record. Now you're getting another $600,000-$700,000 that you're going to owe the record label back. You can be $1 million unrecouped to your record label, have a platinum album, and still not have any money out of your record label. Now, again, I'm using very loose terms, and I'm using loose numbers, and it doesn't always happen that way, but more often than not, it does happen that way. Or you get a whole bunch of money from a record label as an advance, and you go out and sell 75,000 units, and the label says you're out of here and your career is washed up. There's a real balance of how you spend that money. And where it comes from. But you can be a mediocre success. You can go out and have a gold album, and you can go out on the road for $7,500 a night, and you can play 3 nights a week. And so that's, what is that, 70, it's 15, that's 20, let's call it 22,000 a week. And you can play 50 dates. So I can't do the math, but 50 times 22,000 is a lot of money. So there are ways to go out there and make money happen. You have to be very shrewd about your money. Do you sign with these big behemoths, these big behemoth record labels versus the indie route? For some artists, it's good to go an indie route. Now, you may, instead of getting, $250,000 to make your record, you might get $5,000 or $10,000. And there's a lot of quandaries. Do we go indie? Do we go to a major label? What's the best for us? I'm even struggling that with my group right now. Do we go indie? Do we go to the major label? Well, there's pros and cons on both sides. Yes, if you sign to the big behemoth major label, you're going to get a bunch of money. You could be unrecouped, and your career could be over tomorrow. However, if you are going to be successful, then you better be on a major label, because when that chairman says, gee, this record by the Four Chairs is getting a lot of play around the United States, I'm going to push that button. When he pushes that button, or she pushes that button, your records are in every store in America, probably in Europe, when they decide to get behind your record and push that big button. So if you believe in yourself and you think you're fabulous, then you're going to want to be on a major record label, because they're going to get your records into the stores. I don't call them CDs, I call them records. They're going to get your records into the stores everywhere, and they're going to get behind you. If you flop, you're going to flop big time at a major label, and they're going to kick you up, and you could be, washed up. Indie label, you can get a lot of attention on an indie label. You can get them working side by side with you, getting you out on the road, helping you sell your CDs off the road, from your car or from wherever you're going to be doing it, which is what bands nowadays should be doing anyways. They will help you. An indie label can send you out under the radar, and you can build a fan base in a lot of cities. So you're not going to sign for a lot of money, you're not going to make your CD for a lot of money. But they will pay you the absolute attention. And they have a lot of connections to get you into this club in Tulsa and this club in Phoenix. So the first time you get into that club, maybe there's 9 people that see you. The second time you come back there's 20 people. You're selling your CDs. The third time you come back, to Ann Arbor, now there's 500 people in the club. And so what a band really wants to do in that situation is an indie label will get behind you. You can get out on the road. You can build a base at colleges and do all of that. And you can get known. Bands have to tour these days. They have to get out and build that base in each of these cities and build a fan base. You've got to do that. And then you take your stack of CDs and you sell them at the gig for, $8 a piece. So let's say you're getting, $300 to play the gig, and now you sold another $300 in CDs. You're getting $600, You move on to the next city, and that indie label is supporting you. Problem with the indie label is they don't have the funding to be able to get you any kind of airplay properly in this day and age, which the whole state of radio in America right now is abhorrent. And they're not going to be able to really get the giant funding. Let's say your record starts to take off in Phoenix, and all of a sudden you're huge, and then it spreads to other cities. And they may not be able to react fast enough. Their distribution stream may not be as large. But I believe they both have functions. But, just in the case of Nirvana, they were on, Sub Pop. Eventually they had to go to a major. I think they went to Geffen to make them happen. There are a few good labels out there these days. There are some systems that aren't broken. There aren't labels that have been bought by, other companies that have nothing to do with the music business, and then they fire all the good people within them because they're cranking the numbers. Even the big behemoth record labels should have true little indie offshoots that just do nothing but get bands out there and build fan bases in these cities. And then if the band starts to make it, they can just walk upstairs to the behemoth. That, to me, would be the good model for it to happen. Because then your band isn't, you're not unrecouped for all these millions of dollars walking into your next record. You're not spit out by, what happens is at the majors, you get all of this money, and it really comes down to a bean counter within that label. Because the bean counter in the meetings that they all go into, because it is a business. There's two words to show business, show and business. Artists have to understand that. But it comes down to the point where we say, God, we really love that group, the Four Chairs. We all think they're great, but geez, they only sold 70,000 units. So the bean counter, he rolls up his sleeves and he brings out his pencil and scratching his head and he says, we got to get rid of them. So you're done at the behest of a bean counter. It's endemically the problem with record labels today, that they do not spend the time to develop artists. So if I could give any artist or any band the greatest key is build your fan base. Get out on the road however you can. Demonstrate that you've sold 5,000 CDs. Because the record labels today want it delivered on a silver platter. I could never have signed Prince today in this atmosphere. They want to come out and see you. The labels that I have seen want instantaneous hits. They don't want to develop you. They don't want to waste 2 or 3 albums. It's too expensive. Radio promotion is too expensive. Marketing is too expensive. So they want you to come intact like you've been on the road and you're the Rolling Stones after the 15th year, and they want you to have, 5 hits under your belt. The greatest thing that happened at Warner Brothers back in 1977 was I had to go convince the chairman of Warner Brothers, Mo Austin, that a 17-year-old kid who had never made a record before was going to produce his own album in the studio. And he looked up at me and he said, okay, I believe in this artist. I believe we're going to have to waste an album. But I'll give it to you. I'll stand behind you. And he did that. And that would never happen today, in today's atmosphere. It just won't happen. They'd look at you like you were crazy. They want it all delivered on a silver platter. It's wrong. The record labels should be developing artists. That's their business, not bringing it to them on a silver platter. Because what happens is you have an A&R man at a record label, A&R person at a record label, and they're not being groomed and developed. Because if they signed the XYZ Act and that act doesn't make it, they're out of a job. It's like instantaneous. It's the McDonald's. The biggest problem today is the lack of development of artists and people within companies that passionately, and outside of companies, managers, people inside of record labels that will passionately fight for their artists. Case in point with Prince again. The senior vice president who became eventually the chairman of Warner Brothers, a guy named Russ Thyrett. He was senior vice president of radio promotion at that time. And we became best friends at that time. He's one of the reasons that Prince got signed to Warner Brothers. He walked into a meeting and said, if you don't sign this kid, I quit this company. There's no one that would ever do that these days. Plus, the system is a little broken down. I know I'm going to get my hands hit with a ruler for saying this. What the behemoth record labels do these days, and they've always done it, but now people are growing tired of it, and I think the internet is going to eventually, in the next 20 years, is going to throw some competition at it, is the big behemoth record labels will loan you $500,000 to live on and make your album, okay? And then you incrementally pay that back to them through your record royalties, maybe $1.50 or $2 an album, you pay that back to them. And gee, one day you've paid all that money back. Isn't that terrific? But guess what? They still own your creative work, your album. It'd be like if you came to me as a painter and you said, can you loan me money? I'm a Van Gogh. And you create the most wonderful painting and I loan you, $1,000 to make that painting. And then you pay me that money back and I still own your painting. That's going to have to get changed. But I don't think it's going to happen this year. I think it's going to happen many, many moons, down. So what happens to an atmosphere where bands aren't developed anymore? You have these McDonald hit bands. You get these boy bands that come up. And you get these bands that, that's why people are complaining about music these days, for the most part. You get this McDonald's atmosphere, this music is pushed out on radio, and you have to pay promotion men to go out and get these things played on radio. You can only push the most instantaneous thing. You get bands that are never going to leave their mark on this earth. I'd love to name them right now, but I'm not going to. But we all know who they are. They are not going to leave their mark on this earth. We haven't seen a band come along that's going to, I think maybe U2, Nirvana for me was one of the last bands that, I'm sure a lot of people argue, but when I first heard Nirvana in 92 or whatever it was like, oh, thank God, we're back to some real music again. I don't see that happening. And I turn on the radio and it's like, oh my gosh, this is pablum, this is, it's just BS. And and yet it's moving out there. The development is gone. And that is a sad state of affairs for truly creative artists. The nurturing, the passion. I had a band that we gave a showcase. They flew us to New York. This is a huge record label. Everyone here on the West Coast loved this artist. They thought this is the greatest thing they've ever seen. Every person that worked in the label, every secretary came to the showcase, every A&R guy, every senior VP, and they all could not believe it, and they wanted us to play for the chairman of their company in New York. And we went out there and played for the chairman of that record label. And the chairman was like not 100% on the group. All of these people fled for the walls and completely abandoned this group because they were worried about their jobs because the emperor wasn't 100%. Couldn't get them on the phone again. They were calling me 5 times a day. Now, where in the business, who's going to fight for you? That's got to be your manager now. Who's going to fight passionately for you? I mean, I've been on the phone passionately fighting for this particular band because it's stupid. The passion is gone. So you have to create your passion, and you have to fight, and you have to do this. So I'm sorry, I know I'm an older guy, but I grew up in a day where if it was good, and you fought for it. And we weren't worried about the numbers that much. We were worried about your development as a creative artist. So my thing for bands today is do as much of your creative development early on. Get honest, get real about your songs. Try to surround yourself with some people who can pull you up rather than you're having to pull them up. Get yourself around better musicians. Find co-writes. Don't be hung up in writing by yourself. Get yourself to some other people to co-write. Start getting your band out on the road and selling some of, anybody can press up a CD these days. So you can anybody can record, Pro Tools or whatever. There's a million systems out there that you can make. You're going to have to do a lot of the work yourself these days. You're going to have to get your Pro Tools rig or whatever, rig is out there. Record your stuff. Get that CD pressed up on your little, burn your CDs, get as many gigs as possible, and you're going to have to get into as many cities or wherever you can and start selling these CDs out of the trunk of your car. There's so many avenues for bands to make money that are not dependent upon record labels, but they can use to cause attention to get the labels in. Gosh, if you could sell, 100 CDs a week at $8, it's $800 a week. Now let's say you're playing 2 gigs at 150, you're making your band is bringing in 50 grand a year. You've got to be business people yourselves as artists, and I do believe a lot of artists are more astute these days as to the business. Back in the 50s and early 60s, oh, you didn't get your record royalties? Well, hey, I bought you a Cadillac instead. Why don't you just take that Cadillac and drive it off? Those days are gone. Artists have to be smart about the business. They have to be smart about getting their bands together, rehearsing their bands, cutting their music. And then cutting through. But it can be done. So you may have to leave your hometown, and you may have to leave Des Moines, and you may have to move to LA, or New York, or Nashville, or Chicago, or any place where there's a music scene. Bob Dylan, there was no business entity in Minneapolis. He was from northern Minnesota. There was no business entity, so he had to leave and become a New York signing. Because the business ain't going to be there in Des Moines or, Biloxi. Maybe not. Your chances of getting yourself to a manager is to move. You got to move to where the ducks are. as much as we hate it. A lot of people make a lot of jokes about Los Angeles, but the band that I'm managing, if you're lucky enough to get a gig at the Viper Room or at the Key Club here, even though some people don't like those gigs, and there happens to be an A&R person just having a drink there or there to see another band, and they catch your band, that's where they are. That A&R person, chances are they're not winding up in Three Corners, Illinois. It's just, so you really have, if you believe in yourself, you have to at least take that shot in your life to get to a place where these people are. And then when these managers come to you and they say, man, I used to manage the Rolling Stones. I can't tell you how many people I bumped into that managed Prince, that discovered Prince, that told me to my face, I discovered Prince. So they're always out there, but you can check those people out, and you can start reading some of these books. Online is a wealth of information. You don't have to become a lawyer or anything, just have to have a general sense of what is publishing. How do record labels make money? How do I make money from record labels? And it's out there. Now, my biggest word of advice to managers and artists and anyone who wants to be in this business is, there is really no such thing as luck. You know how you hear, God, this guy was so lucky, And I can't remember who told this to me early on. It's not original. I wish it was. And I'll tell you my one, which is original. Luck is preparation meeting opportunity. So if you're not prepared, when the opportunity comes along, it's not going to be right. I mean, if you can't play your guitar or sing, and Mr. A&R guy comes into your town, you're not going to make it. If you're prepared and then an opportunity comes along, that's luck. Gee, that A&R guy came into town, discovered this artist, but that artist had been practicing in their basement for 5,000 days and had been out touring and had gotten in front and worked and wrote songs and did it. So luck is really preparation meeting opportunity. That's what it is. And then my other saying is, you can fool all the people some of the time, and that's enough to make a damn good living.